Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime series with Kevin, where we add value to people's lives, happening every day on eBiz Radio at 12 o'clock. Joining me today for hashtag Candid Conversations with my cousin, all the way from Fort Lauderdale in Florida, the US. Lauren, how are you doing?
Hi, Kev. Doing so good. It's so great to see you. I'm sitting here in sunny South Florida, where we had the first day of spring yesterday. So we are enjoying this. Our daylight savings just changed as well, so we got an extra hour of daylight. So yeah, the sun sets around, I don't know, about 8 o'clock right now. And we're enjoying those long, long days. So very happy. How's things out there in South Africa?
We are steadily steadily on our way to to winter. Today has been quite a chilly day in Johannesburg, actually. So yeah, and you know, Johannesburg, I know Cape Town. Well, Cape Town has really like terrible weather in winter time. Bloemfontein is unbelievably freezing, but cold. Johannesburg is not any better. Like we get some cold weather. Yeah. As you know,
I think a lot of people ask me here in Florida and in America. I mean, some people know, and a lot of people have been to South Africa actually, but a lot of people don't realize how cold it gets. And yeah, I often avoid going to South Africa in those months because it's too cold for me. But yeah, it gets pretty cold there in the winter. I mean, it's only 3 months, 4 months, but still, it's pretty chilly.
It is, yeah. So I mean, one of the conversations that's recently been in the news, and you know, for those who listen to the show on a Friday, this is a hashtag Candid Conversations with my cousin. So we try and be as blatant and candid as possible. And you know, one of those conversations that sort of peaked its head again, and I mean, you and I have mentioned it before. We've spoken briefly about it, but never sort of tackled it head on, and that's the conversation about misogyny, right? So, and just like plain sexist behavior, in you know, you find it in relationships, you find it in workspace, you find it in friendships, and people very often kind of just dismiss it. You know, they kind of go, oh well, you know, because I love this person, it's okay. You know, I won't say anything. Or because, oh, you know, it's my boss, or, oh, you know, this colleague and I have been working together for how many years, so it's maybe
one I've heard a lot is, oh, don't worry, he doesn't really mean that. You know him, he doesn't really mean that. That's not his intention. You know, when sometimes things are said, and I think it's because, and like you say, it shows up in every area of our lives, really. And sometimes it's not that obvious anymore. You know, it shows up very subtly.
One of the saddest things that recently appeared is the case of Sarah Everard, right, in the UK, where she was just heading home one night from wherever she was, and got picked up by a policeman, and ended up being murdered and raped and killed, and because of you know, like thinking that you would actually trust this person who's supposed to be like someone to keep you safe, right?
Yeah, and it's a crazy story. The irony behind that story is actually very sad, very, very sad, you know.
And what sort of when you and I first chatted about it was, I put my foot in my mouth once on the show and spoke about, you know, someone wearing a skimpy outfit, and the one of the producers at eBiz Radio, well, the owner, messaged me and said, hey, listen, just so you know, there's actually nothing wrong with people wearing what the hell they want. And I was like,
yep.
Okay. And I was like, I didn't realize, like, and again, you know, being male, growing up in a very male-dominated, like, environment, it was like a very, I didn't think anything even of that comment, right? And then recently, I actually saw someone like a post where it said, parents look after your daughters or something like that, because of what's happened in the UK, and someone scratched it out and said, parents look after your son's behavior, change your son's behavior, right? And they kind of pointed it out. And I was like, well, that's exactly the point, right? You shouldn't, no one should be intimidated, or nothing should be said about what people are wearing. You know, like, it's like, if you want to wear that, wear it. It's got nothing to do with what sex you are, or what you're trying to insinuate, or like, it's just you wearing what the hell you want to wear.
It's just an excuse. And, you know, Kev, I think we need to also just look at defining really the difference between sexism and misogyny, because sexism is, you know, very much like judgment based on sex, you know, like women are bad drivers, and, you know, women need to cook dinner, and like roles that women need to take on and men don't, or the other way around. But misogyny, I think, is more like it's the, you know, where if sexism synthesizes the disregard for women, misogyny is like the action that sort of plays out the disregard itself. Yeah. So these two things show up in so many different ways, and you can be sexist and not necessarily outwardly misogynistic, or you know, you could be both. But what I think is,
on that point, sorry, Lars, but according to Google, the actual meaning of misogyny is the dislike of, or contempt for, or ingrained prejudice against women.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
And I think that's exactly, you know, the difference. You know, there's an actual prejudice that you have against the other sex. Right. And I think a lot of gay people actually have that. They have a real visceral reaction towards the sex they're not attracted to, which I find, I've always really found like, that's quite weird. Like, why are you so...
Very interesting topic, that as well. And I mean, let's go back to, you know, I remember the last conversation we had about racism and Meghan Markle and all the royal family and the antics going on there in the firm, and it was, you were so perturbed by just the fact that it was happening. It was made you so uncomfortable, and you were like, oh, why are we still talking about this? Now go back to, you know, not just racism, but being a woman, just your gender alone, like, identifies you to a certain part of the population as a certain, you know, I read it. It goes back to, because I've been wondering, where the hell does this come from? Why is it perpetuating like this? Even in nowadays, men that aren't really outwardly misogynistic, they're still sometimes regurgitating things they've heard in the past, and they're not putting two and two together yet. But this goes back, from what I've read and just sort of reading different people's opinions about it, this goes back to Adam and Eve. You know, that is a very long belief system that's been in play and thought. Yeah. So if you go back even into the 30s and stuff, there were men that used to write about women, about their disdain for women, how all of them are, you know, sort of misleading, and they will be the end of a man if they're not controlled. Just like crazy stuff, like we're hysterical, you know, and then we're witches. And I can't believe, like, I feel like you felt about the racist conversation. I'm like, how? Because Eve ate the apple and was the downfall of Adam? I mean, surely I don't feel like that is necessarily the real story in essence. I mean, was the snake male? You know, he's the one that coerced her in the first place. So all I'm saying is, how do we talk about something that's been spoken about so much? How do we bring awareness to it when it goes back to the beginning of our existence? And, you know, there's just so much conversation about it, but what happened to her in England was devastating, because she had probably taken every step possible that women naturally go through all these thoughts that run through our minds before we do anything, before you go running, before you take a walk home, before you catch the bus, before you catch an Uber, before you get home from work and you're driving and you're coming into your house. There's like so much that goes through our minds, what we need to do in order to keep ourselves safe. And here this woman, Sarah, runs into a police officer. And I mean, they don't have guns even, you know, it's not like he held her with a gun and, you know, he just took her, you know, and she felt helpless and then he destroyed her. A police officer, the one person that's supposed to keep you safe. Yeah. It was very sad. And what can we do about this? What conversation can we have with men? Because the women already have this conversation. We already know. Can we start talking to men about this? And I mean, even misogynistic men. Like, let's sit down and talk about this. How do we, you know, just like racists don't like certain people of certain creeds and colors and you know, religions, there are some, it's become very aware to me in my mind that there are men out there that, and I use the word lightly, but they hate women for whatever reason. And the irony is you come out of a woman's body. So there's no doubt about that, you know. What makes a person hate and have such disdain for women? And we can include this in our own family. We're both from the same family. We would be lying if we said our own family wasn't like that. They're misogynistic in their own way. They have hated on women, on me personally, for a long time. And it is in so many subtle ways that it's difficult to even verbalize it, because the subtleties are so difficult to put into words. But so, you know, we need to talk about it.
On that note, so the University of the People .edu shares some examples of actual sexism and misogyny, and you know, one of them, the first one that comes up is insults as jokes, and the reference they use is wear a low skirt or wear a low cut skirt to the meeting, and I'm sure you'll close the deal. Now it's stuff like that, you know, that's it doesn't sound like an insult. It doesn't sound like you're saying anything wrong. You're joking, right? And if you actually relook at what it's saying, you're kind of going, there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with saying that to anybody, you know, like inferring because they're a certain type of something, that's probably going to be the best approach to this business deal.
Well, what it infers is so many things, that I couldn't get the deal without my low-cut top, potentially. That in order for me to get the deal, I would have to pull out a boob or show some cleavage, or like, you know, slip them a little look under the table when I cross my legs. Like, why can't I just go into a boardroom with a freaking turtleneck and get the deal done?
Yeah, like why not? Why is it?
Yeah, I have the brain for it. Like, women don't need boobs. Some women don't even have boobs, you know, like, and big boobs are not even really a big sexy thing anymore. Like, it's, why can't why? You know, what are you going to do when you go in? What are you going to show?
Yeah. I mean, another thing that comes up is role stereotyping. Right, so you know, because you're a man, you're you know, that's obvious. So those are the obvious things that you're supposed to be doing. But because you're a woman, you know, then the approach and the intake, or you know, the impact that you'll have in that environment is obviously going to be a certain kind of way, and you're kind of going, that shouldn't be that way, right? It shouldn't be. Like, you should just be, like you said, good enough because you have the brain power to do it. You know, that's what it should boil down to. Like, the fact that you're best at it, you're best at the job.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention here that I understand for myself that men and women are, and everything else that will show up in our world, have different abilities. Yes,
Yeah.
women are potentially, some of us, not all of us, like we're all different, but some of us are probably sometimes more nurturing because we're mothers. Or some of us are not nurturing and we don't like children at all. Or, you know, the point is that I understand that in our gender roles, and as that changes, we may be better at some things than others, but even that's changing over time. There's a lot of gentle men in the world, you know, that can take that same sort of role. But in this case, it's more like, you know, these old school stereotypes. You know, woman must go make the coffee, or in the office, or woman should, when the lunch arrives, she should take care of it for everybody else, despite her role being equal.
And that also leads, you know, to that conversation where you say, well, let's look at the shape of a woman. Well, let's look at the, you know, how does she have a fine ass on her? Like I've heard men say that, you know.
Oh,
like,
yeah, I mean, and a lot worse.
Yeah, I mean, you know, for me, I've never said something like that, but you kind of going, like, the more I've had this conversation and the more I'm learning about it, the more I'm realizing that, you know, having a daughter and bringing a daughter up in the world, you're kind of going, how would I feel if someone did that to my daughter? How would I feel if someone said that to her? And I'd be like, outraged.
How would you feel?
You know, I would, I would feel a little bit defeated, just purely because, you know, as a dad, I'm always wanting to kind of protect, to, you know, and I'm sure as a mom as well, but I'm speaking from a dad's perspective. You know, as a dad, I'm always wanting to make it okay for her, you know. And if she ever found herself in that position, or, you know, in an environment with someone like that, I, like, defeated would be close to rage. Like, it would be like really like a hair breadth away from rage, of like, how dare you, and, you know, whatever that level is, which I try and avoid.
I have an off the cuff question based on that question.
Yeah.
There are some fathers, and they love their daughters, but they're still misogynistic. They still don't care that men treat their daughters that way, and they still don't care that men speak about their daughters that way. And that, to me, is the most difficult thing to understand, because they think, it seems, that behavior is like all men are like that. And I have been told this to my face by people I love, that all men are like that. Now, can you imagine that I actually believed that?
Yeah, that's
scary. Imagine I actually believed what they said to me, and I actually believed all men were like that. I'd become a man-hating machine. I would become angry, and then I'd become the hysterical, crazy person you're trying to always tell people I am. Like, why is it that not all fathers of daughters and sons and whoever, but in this particular conversation, daughters, why are they not more hands-on about the misogyny in their children's world?
Yeah, it's a very frightening, sad, like, realization, really, you know, because I think I've recently been around at family where I was listening to two people have a conversation, and they're family, you know, and then you kind of go father and son kind of dynamic, and you're kind of going, everything you're hearing from the one person, the other person's not hearing, right? And there's such miscommunication happening. And, you know, so when you say, like, what's to be done about it, and what could potentially be done about it, is I really think that people, and especially men, especially fathers, especially husbands, partners, really need to be more present about how the other person and what the other person is saying. Like, just stop with your own mind matter and your ego and your whatever gets in the way of how it's supposed to be, and just shut up basically just shut up and listen.
And listen.
Just don't say anything, right?
And listen, I am really curious. Like, I want to speak to misogynistic people, create this space where I listen to them and say, okay, tell me, why do you hate women so much? What's with the disdain? Do you I mean, did this idea of women being perpetually crazy and like the end of you and they can crush your existence? I mean, is this where, I mean, really, Eve, like, come on already. Like, this is not normal. And for men who are having daughters and, you know, they need to be protected. And they don't need to be protected because they're weak. They're essentially more vulnerable. That's not their fault.
Yeah.
But we do need to start, you know, if you're a man and you have a daughter, and you, Kev, let's say you right now, let's take you as an example, and you go hang out in your friend groups and whatever, and you hear somebody say something like, you know, really sexist, or, well, you know, that's a job for a woman, I'm not going to do that, or something like that. Yeah. The same as the thing we said with the racism. It's an opportunity for that man to get really uncomfortable for the sake of his mother, his daughter, his aunties, his nieces, his granddaughters one day, to say, listen, you know, pick your words. You do it how you want to do it. I'm not saying to be confrontational or, hey, you know, you're a psychopath, or name calling or judgment. You don't even have to be judgmental. You just have to point out that that is no longer the narrative in this day and age. Women are incredible. And it's not that every woman on earth is an incredible person. I'm sure there's some dodgy people out there. But women as a whole, you know, they need that from men. They need that from people in general, really. And as we move and our genders also change, this information is also going to change. Now we have, you know, this type of behavior towards every other gender that's shown up, or every other category that now exists. So, yeah. But I would say the hate of women would probably stem back the furthest. And the only thing that I think is going to help is if men start talking up, if women start talking up. The other thing I do want to say on that is women also need to be careful, or people in general need to be careful that we don't do the same thing to men. Yeah. Because that's not going to be helpful. So the pushback on misogyny is often, well, you're a misogynist and you're a, you know, beep, and you're a this, and how dare you, and you're just a disgusting pervert, and you're a chauvinistic pig. Like, that's not helpful either, right? So somewhere we need to come together and start to realize we can respect each other's abilities regardless of gender. But I cannot tell you how much I still experience misogyny and sexism and disrespect. People see I'm a woman doing my work and literally come in and they interfere, and they're like, oh, let me tell you what to do and how to do it. And I'm like, hold on, get out of my territory. Who are you? You know, like,
as you talk, you know, one of the things that come up for me, and it's less of a misogynistic kind of moment that happens for me, but as a gay man and having a partner, one of the things that often happen is that labeling of roles, you know. And I was thinking recently, and I said, you know, people have this idea that there's a man and a woman role in a gay relationship. And there may be
that's a heterosexual relationship.
Right? And then I was saying to my family, I was like, guys, you know, when I'm with my partner, we're just like two best friends having loads of fun, and we happen to have sex with each other too. You know, that's who we are. We don't, like, there's no, oh, well, you know, because you earn so much money, that makes you the husband of the moment. Like, there's no kind of, like, you know, like, oh, well, so I make food, so I'm definitely the wife, but Eugene washes dishes. So you're going, okay, so who's that? Did you swap?
Oh yeah, you're swapping roles now.
Right, and I think that's the conversation that people really need to stop having. And I think it's a, like, where does it stop? Because you mentioned, like, if women are doing it to men, women do it to men. Men, like, oh, you're the man, you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do that, you're supposed to behave a certain way.
I don't want to talk about that specifically too much to men, because people use that as a crux. They use it as an excuse. It's the same as saying, well, all lives matter instead of Black Lives Matter. It's what's happened to women. We cannot turn around and say, well, it's also happening to men, so tough.
Yeah.
No, what's happening there is happening there. People should not turn around and do the same to men. I don't think that's going to be helpful. And they do it already. But what I would say is, my partner is a man, but he does cooking. He won't let me in the kitchen, to be honest. I love to cook, but he wants to do it. So there he goes. I do other things. But what I will say is that one of the weirdest misogynistic things I've ever heard is a man ask how two women have sex. And it's so interesting because it's funny to me in a way that men think sex is based around a penis. And, I'm like, no, that's not how it works, especially for a woman, Yeah. A woman does not need that. So not necessarily. She may have a preference. But it's interesting to me that people think that there's only one way of doing that. I'm like, everybody has their own preferences. Pleasure is a thing that doesn't require any specific utensils or body parts. It's it's a personal preference, and we have to try to not label everything like this, man, woman. We may be able to move over to a more feminine, masculine, because that's more energy. You have the feminine energy, you have the masculine energy, but all of us have both of those, and we show them at different times. But for me personally, I think that doing the same to men is not going to work. We need to have conversations with men who are going to try to help us out there in the world, But how do you go forward when you realize that even the police will rape and kill you, potentially? Who do you trust? It's, what do you do? What does a woman do? How do you get home at night, without freaking out?
And I think that's the point of today's conversation, right? Is to, like, how do we actually start having conversations about this, and whether, if this impacts one person by the time they hear this, right, then at least we've done that, right? I was just looking at that, like, what are some of the things you can do? And you've already mentioned, speak out when you see sexism happening. There's also ensure equal contributions are welcomed. I think that's also a big, contributing factor, is that very often we don't ensure that equal contributions happen. We don't ensure that there's equal amount of conversation happening, or input or opinion or consideration. Allow everyone to be able to talk. Let everyone have that opinion. One of the things that it does mention here is reframe the discussions. And I like that to me, I know that I've actually done that, right? So when people have come in from a really one kind of entry points, biased kind of point of view, I kind of go, no, hang on, can we just say that it's this instead of that? And then like when you bring it to their attention, they kind of like, okay, that's what I mean. Like,
and this is the beauty of conversation, because the whole purpose of a conversation is to be reciprocated and seen and acknowledged by the person you're talking to. That's how you know you exist, to be honest. If you were on a deserted island like Tom Hanks was once with Wilson, you are going to have a hard time understanding your own existence, because you cannot reframe it in the I don't want to say in the shadow, but in the reflection of another person. And it's not to say they're reflecting exactly you back to you, but your energies are combining, and they're working their way, and they're reflecting back to you. So reframing, you know, if somebody says something sexist to me, I don't go, oh yeah, I start yelling. I go, excuse me, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't say it like this. Or could we please rephrase that to say it like this instead? Or something like that, because you're right. You know, and I read here that also people should question their beliefs. That's a very powerful step to take in your own life. You know, I for a long time was very gung-ho about a lot of things. You know, I was all about the justice and injustice of life and things. And I got to a point where I realized that was making me biased as well. So I decided to live in a world of I don't know. I don't actually know.
Yeah.
I think I know, but I don't. And I've learned a lot just by being reflective like that. Like, I've said things sometimes, it comes out of my mouth and I'm like, whoa, retract real quick. Let me rephrase that. That's a great thing to do. That's a very noble thing to do. So if you are out there and you're not sure if you're being sexist, there's so many things that are sexist and racist from our past that kind of filters in words and phrases and stuff. And just hold them for a second in a space and check your belief system. You might actually, you know, people might learn something. And if you're making sexist jokes and nobody's laughing anymore, then you know why. You know,
you know, I think it's because I do what I do. For me, part of my job is to shut up and listen. Like you literally have to be okay. Just stop talking and let this person speak. And the strange thing, and one of the things, like especially around their own belief systems, is that their belief systems hold true to the identity of how they show up. So it's so ingrained, and it's so like, this is who I am, and this is how I show up in the world. This is how I exist. This is my reality. That when you challenge a belief system, they kind of go, no, but that's not even possible. Like, how could you, like, that just doesn't even make sense. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that, you know, like I would take away from today's conversation is as you mentioned, like, live in that space of I don't know. I'm like living in, I call it often like living in the space of curiosity. Like when you kind of going, like, I know what I think I know, and then you kind of go, okay, but what if I didn't know? And you're like, and in NLP we often call it like, you don't know what you don't know until you know you know. And when you know you know, you know
exactly.
and you're kind of going, oh God, yeah, now I know. And
you didn't know what you didn't know that you didn't know that you didn't even know.
Exactly. You know, until you get to that point, you live by the directive of what your belief system is telling you, and that's
and
just
how you've been framed. Right.
Yeah, you know, and it's frightening because you kind of look at all the biggest issues that we have in the world, and how cultures, religion, politics, and all of these big major things that affect masses of people are ingrained by a like certain type of belief system, right? And it's
amazing, you know, I mean, it's amazing how, you know, those belief systems, the narrative and the stereotypes can really, humans are quite simplified. I mean, I think the world is a lot more complex than we simplify it so we can understand. But it just as a quick example of thinking, I mean, the other day I said to somebody, you know, they're doing away with the mask mandate for COVID in Texas. There's no more, you know, there's no more mandates, there's no more lockdowns. Texas is open and free and 100%, and everyone can now make their own choices and decisions.
Yeah.
And I said it like that, and what came back to me is, how can America do that? I was like, wow. America didn't do that. Texas did that, you know? So sometimes when we skip over the details because we don't understand the context. And I think it's going to become increasingly more important as we move forward into the golden age, which is actually what we're heading to now.
Sorry, just to add to what you're saying there is, from a neuroscience perspective, part of what your brain does is generalize, distort, and delete information. So and that's the biggest mistake that we make is we make generalizations and we go, okay, so I've got this amount of information, and then we go, oh, the US, have you seen what the US is doing?
Right. And I mean, listen,
yes,
just to think about the difference it can make. I mean, there's 35 million people, somewhere like that in Texas.
Yeah.
Or 25 million, something like that. And there's 350 million people in America. I mean, we're talking about a small part, not the bigger part. And every part is its own boss. So it really can distort the perspective. So, we often speak in stereotypes. We often speak in generalizations because we'd never stop speaking otherwise if we had to refer to every single detail. But that's a given, and that you can contextualize as you're talking. But a lot of people, people have said to me, all men are like this. A man has said to me that they believe all men are like this, XYZ, misogynistic, they have it in them. They just won't tell you about it. Doesn't matter how nice they are. Oh, wow. They are. So,
it completely skews your reality, or it skews everything about what you know to be real, right?
Well, imagine growing up like that. Imagine what that does to your trust of the other gender.
Yeah.
Imagine the fear that it implies. Imagine the you can't get away from it. There's no way out. You're stuck here, and that's it. If I didn't see for myself that was absolutely, categorically not true. Yes, there are amazing men that are still making comments. They don't realize they're making comments. And I'm not going to terrorize them for it. I just want to point it out. Like, are you really misogynistic? Or are you just saying that because that's just what we've said for 1,000 years? It's, violence against women from misogyny, from sexism is probably, I want to say, first or second on our biggest problem on earth. I mean, that and children, so it's between that and children, the most vulnerable of people. And, we absolutely need, and this is why what you say, we do distort, and I think we have to distort it. We can't get through all the details of our lives without somewhat distorting it. But if you know you're doing that, contextualize yourself and understand what you're doing. Even if you're speaking in a generalization, you really don't, your intention is not to be generalized. Yeah. But we can't say all men are misogynistic. We can't say all women are, hysterical and crazy. So we need the help of men. Everyday men. We need moms to teach and fathers to teach their sons.
Yeah.
How to respect women in general, whether they like the one or not. How to, from very young. Like, remember in when we were little, they would always say, "Oh, if a boy hurts you, it's because he likes you."
Yeah, that's like, what?
What?
That's a bad reason.
Where did you even get that from? Who gave you that information? And why have you been telling everybody that for, like, I don't know how long? Can you imagine what that does to a child or a young girl's brain? And the ideas she forms around little boys and men and how they're going to hurt her for the rest of her life. But that means they like her. I mean, there's so much of this. Like, we could spend hours just talking about these little things that people say, or the big things people say. At the end of the day, we need the help of just people, men, women, teach your boys, teach your girls, bring up the conversation, change the narrative, change the conversation. When you hear a little boy or a little girl, especially, saying something, Have the conversation. Don't just overlook it. You could make a really big difference in that person's life, and it will perpetuate through the ages, through time, through generations.
So, I mean, I suppose in summary of today's conversation, that would be the sentiment, right? For me, definitely, let's have, again, it's almost like the racism conversation, you know, let's have better, you know, ask better questions so we can have better answers to the conversations. And, you know, teach your kids that pointing out stuff like this and having such negative beliefs around it is problematic. I mean, that's
Absolutely.
You know, for me, that's like really having good conversations about it.
Yeah, I mean, instead of having to teach your daughter or your son to be safe and how to get home safe, which you still have to do, go to your sons and say to them, listen, this is what a girl has to go through every day of her life. Take them through it. Actually go through it, you know? If somebody just walked me through my subconscious thinking every day, we got a long list. I don't run outside. I don't by myself. I'm constantly aware of my safety. It never stops, ever. And rather go to your boys and say, this is what happens. This is what we need to do. This is how we can help. You know, hold the little girl's hand across the street. Or, you know, protect her, not because she's crazy or weak, but because she's a beautiful, vulnerable creature, you know? Absolutely.
Lauren, if we want to get hold of you, so where do we go? Because you know, like we have these conversations often, and I know people by like, who's this Lauren person? So how people would get hold of you? Because like it's
absolutely.
I mean, coming from a journalistic background, being a photographer for the last 20 years, like, you know, there's lots that people can like learn from you and know from you and know about you. So where's the quickest way to do that?
Absolutely. So, you know, in my journey as a photographer, I do specialize in branding photography for companies and individuals across the world. But I come from a journalistic background, and I have a great interest in speaking and the general social concepts of the world. So if you do want to get hold of me for any reason, photography, speaking, anything like that, or just a chat, maybe you're just curious to chat across the world, happy to chat with whoever wants to chat, you can get a hold of me at Laurenbritzphotography.com. Just click on my meeting link and you can book a meeting with me, and we can have a half-an-hour chat about either branding, photography, or other things that are happening in your world.
Fantastic. Yeah, guys, so all the information that we're talking about will be shared in the description boxes below. And this goes out live on eBiz Radio every Friday at 12 o'clock. Lars, thank you for joining me. Thanks for having an interesting conversation. And I'll chat to you later. Cheers.
Chat to you soon. Have a great week.